Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today with John Rasiej for the secret weapon of your compelling story. I'm going to tell you a little bit about John before he takes over. In 2010, John came out of retirement to help entrepreneurs and business leaders express clarity and make more money. He had been directing theater for over 20 years and created Speak Louder Than Words to bring the power of commanding the stage to business people who were stuck in the struggle to stand out. John has written 2 successful books on public speaking and has spoken effectively to audiences as small as 4 and as large as 900 across the USA and in Italy. He was the top-selling speaker on the Suzanne Evans/David Nagel More Life Tour. John helps businesses create distinction so they stand out in a crowded market. Now, the webinar is going to last about an hour, and I encourage you, our audience, to send any questions that you may have over in that chat box that you see on your screen. And then what we'll do at the end of the webinar, say the last 5 to 10 minutes if there's time, is we will go through some of your questions and John will take a few minutes to answer them. Okay, John, so if you're ready, you can take the stage.
All right. Well, thank you, Maria and Shay. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I am excited for everybody who's joining us either live or who's going to watch the replay, because this is a topic that I'm personally very excited about. Once I discovered how important this was, it changed a lot of things for me, and I've been working with a lot of people to get them to understand why it can change a lot of things in terms of how they connect with people in a deeper way so they can attract more clients. And before we get into the subject matter, I just know that you may be a little too busy to stay on for the entire webinar, so just in case, I am offering every participant in the webinar a complimentary quick start guide, which is meant to help you dig for your compelling story. And just make a note of the link right now. I'll repeat it toward the end, but just in case you can't stay on, it's bit.ly/startstory. So let's talk about why story matters so much. A lot of us in business think that what people want from us is information. We have lots of information. We've been studying the various things. I'm sorry, I must have my settings on timer, so please forgive the slides not cooperating with me. Anyway, a lot of times we think that what people want is information. And so we spend a lot of our time getting information out to them. But one of the things that I have found, and you likely have too, is that people have more than enough information. There is a wealth of information out there, and there's more being generated every day. I just heard a statistic that every 2 days now there is enough information being generated across the internet and across all the technologies we have to be more than was generated from the beginning of time till the year 2003, which is amazing. So we very often get caught up in this idea of we will just give people information, they'll appreciate us, they'll come and start working with us. And what ends up happening is that people have more than enough information. People are sitting there with all sorts of things going on in their heads. They're not really looking for more information. And even if they were looking for a piece of information, we live in a time where you could just do a quick internet search and pretty much find every piece of information that you really need. People are looking for something more, because what's ending up happening is people right now are being overwhelmed by information. They're getting information from so many sources. They're getting information from blogs, from websites, from emails, from podcasts. It's coming in fast and furious. People are looking for something deeper. People are looking for a connection, and people are looking for guidance. They're looking for someone that they can trust for a recommendation to help them. They want to solve some issue, some problem. Maybe it's a relatively new one. Maybe it's something that's been plaguing them for the better part of their lives. But they're looking for some solution. Or they may be looking for someone to help them achieve a dream, something that they've been aspiring to, something they've been hoping to do. Maybe it's to build a new business. Maybe it's to start a family. It could be to have that dream trip. Whatever it is, they're looking for some guidance. And they want their guidance, and this is an important thing to remember. They want their guidance from someone that they feel gets them, that they feel really understands what makes them tick. Because if they don't feel that way, then why would they want to follow the guidance? So they're seeking something bigger. And what they're seeking is they are seeking the emotional connection. They're seeking that sense of there's a tie between the two of us. There's something that really is making you and I feel like there's something deeper, there's something richer, there's an emotional bond. And we all know that although people will rationalize their buying decisions, their decisions to buy a product or a program or take a trip or whatever, they will do research. They'll intellectually work on rationalizing it. What really triggers that action is the emotion, that emotional connection. And if you don't believe that emotion really matters in selling, you don't have to look any further than Starbucks. And you don't have to look very far because they're on every corner. Starbucks figured out that buying coffee doesn't have to be a commodity type of experience. Starbucks created a whole emotional experience, a pleasurable experience, an experience where a barista would write your name down and all the other elements of buying a Starbucks coffee. And they got it to the point that we now don't even think twice about spending $3 or $4 or $5 for a hot beverage, whereas a few years ago, to pay more than $1 for a cup of coffee would have been bizarre. So emotion really matters, and that's why your story has to be compelling, because you want to get your story to connect with people at that emotional level. And we're going to talk about specific ways that you can get your story to that point. What you are seeking to do, in a sense, is to give the people on your list or people who are in front of you at a speaking engagement, you want to give them the sense that they could sit down with you and have a conversation, that you would be able to get into their heads, you'd be able to understand what they feel. And this is really very valuable, because what ends up happening when you have that kind of connection, people see you as more of a colleague, more of someone who could be a trusted mentor. Imagine if you're someone, for example, who has to deal with, let's say, issues around weight. And standing in front of you is someone who looks incredibly buff, incredibly well sculpted, incredibly in great shape, and talks about all the ins and outs of how to maintain a great physique and a great outlook on life, and proper training, proper diet, and so on and so forth, and never talks about the struggle that he or she had to face. The person in the audience who is facing that kind of challenge knows we're all flawed beings, right? That person knows, oh my goodness, every once in a while I'm going to fall apart on my diet. I'm going to sneak and get some ice cream, or something's going to happen and I'm going to fall off the wagon, or things aren't going to be as easy for me. And they'll look at somebody on stage who has that look of perfection, who isn't sharing his or her struggle, and say, how is this person going to react when I show up and I haven't done my exercises, I haven't eaten as well as I was supposed to? They'll actually have a trigger that may go into fear of doing business with somebody who seems to be so perfect. The person who's standing in front of them likely, even though they now may look absolutely 100% in tip-top shape, that person has almost certainly had some challenges along the way. It was hard work. It may have been a different challenge than the people in the audience faced, but by showing that she or he went through that challenge, understands the struggle, admits to occasionally sneaking that extra ice cream cone, or whatever those other things are that we all face when we face that kind of challenge or any challenge. By admitting that, the person on stage is all of a sudden more accessible, more trustworthy, and that's why you want to go in and be open and be honest about your compelling story. And we're going to talk about why the story has to be compelling and not simply an interesting anecdote. And we're going to talk about what the difference is and why it does matter so much. Your story, you want it to connect at that gut level where if you share a pain that happened to you at a certain point in your life, that people in the audience will go, I know what that feels like. I felt something like that myself. And that's really an amazing thing to have happen, because people will come up to you after speeches and want to talk to you. So the particular reason your story absolutely has to be compelling is because we live in a crowded world. The marketplace is very, very crowded. And without a compelling story that sets us apart, it becomes very difficult for people to realize why they should want to work with us. What is the best option for them, and why would that be us? Without that level of distinction, people will look around and they might see 50 people helping with weight loss and wonder, who's right for me? And they might either go with price shopping. They may go to the one who's around the corner. They may make their choice for any number of reasons, but it may not be the best choice for them. The best choice may be you if these people get a sense of why you share the same kind of experience. And there's another reason you want to make sure you know about your compelling story. And I'm sure many of you on the webinar recognize Simon Sinek, who has one of the more famous TED Talks. I believe the YouTube video was watched over 3 million times. I think you can also access it right at TED.com as well. And the link is on your screen if you want to watch it if you haven't seen it yet. But he has a very famous TED presentation on starting with your why. And he talks there about how when a business succeeds in explaining to people what their big why is, and that's the first reason that they're doing business, then people respond differently. And he cites Apple Computer as an example. He talks about Apple. They don't start with the what being the outside layer. There's 3 layers, the why being the inside, the how being the middle, and the what being the outside, as Mr. Sinek explains it. And he contrasts Apple, which starts with the why, which is to surround people with beautiful things and to give people beautiful things to use as their why. It's not about making computers. It's not about faster processors. It's not about better prices, anything like that. It's really about wanting to enhance people's lives with beautiful things. And he contrasts that with Dell. And Dell would be a company, according to him, that starts with the what. They start from the outside looking in. They talk about, we make great computers. And sometimes it might be, we make great computers that are less expensive than others. But that is a market difference. And he talks about how when you start with your why, that you build in a loyalty factor. You build in a connection that people will want to not only buy from you the first time, but very often, if your why matches the reason that they would want to do business with you, they will want to buy from you over and over and over again. And when you get your compelling story right, that will very often give you an opening into understanding your big why. A lot of us in business, we don't explore that big why. And when we start to look at how our compelling story has impacted our lives and why we're now working on the issues we do, the big why becomes much more evident. So let's talk about a couple of things that people sometimes say when they talk about telling their compelling story. And I have said some of these things myself, so I'm right there with you, and I'll explain a lot about that. The first thing you hear from a lot of people is, my story isn't special. And very often we sort of look at our lives and think, well, nothing traumatic has happened, nothing earth-shattering has happened, nothing fantastic to the point of it would make the front page of the New York Times has happened, so on and so forth. So who would want to listen to my story? And I really did feel this way. And when I was first starting my business, one of the first speakers that I got to both work with and study from was David Nagel. And David is a very powerful mindset coach, a success coach. And he tells a story, and I remember the first time I saw him speak, he tells it as if the event is happening right there in front of you. That he was knocked overboard from a ship, a boat, and he was in a river with some rapids, and he was trying to hang on, and he couldn't avoid being dragged through a dam in the river. And he's telling this story with such impact, such power, and he's sucked through the dam. And you see him standing on stage, and yet you're still holding your breath as he's telling the story. And he talks about being one of only 3 people that are known to have survived going through that dam. So as he's telling the story, I'm ready to throw it all in. I'm thinking to myself, here I am. I want to make a big impact on people. Well, I've never had that kind of experience in my life. I've never had any real near-death experience or those kinds of monster adventures that some people seem to have, those kinds of startling things that would seem to make people sit up and take notice. So I thought to myself, well, but what do I have to offer? There's nothing in my background. And so I was sort of just wondering, and I was working with a coach on my speaking at the time, and I was told everybody has a story. Everybody has a story to share. And we did some digging, and my story is nowhere near David Nagel's in terms of keeping people on the edge of their seat. It's a much more down-to-earth story. But what ends up happening is when you have a very down-to-earth story, you are also connecting with so many people who also have problems and issues that just feel more down to earth. And we'll talk about that as we go on, but it really is a very valuable lesson that I learned, and I had an experience on stage where this really was proven to me. And I'll share that after I share my next point, because the two really do go a bit hand in hand. The other thing that you'll hear from some people is that my story is too painful or embarrassing to share. People will think, oh my goodness, if everybody found out about me, if everybody found out this was my background, this was my history, I could never show my face again. I could never look people in the eye again. Well, the amazing thing is that when you face your story, when you dig down and you get to that part, even if it's embarrassing, even if it leaves you quite vulnerable, you'll find out that the thing that you're most scared to share is likely the thing you most have to share, because that's the biggest pain point that most people are going to share with you. Now that may cause some people to wonder, oh my goodness, he's telling me now I have to go embarrass myself. And it isn't about embarrassing yourself. It is about finding a way to share that truth from a heartfelt place in a way that's appropriate for the time and in a way that lets people in the audience realize that they can trust you 100%. See, what ends up happening for people who say, that part of my story is too painful, so I'll leave that out. You have to imagine that the audience is sitting there, and let's say there's a 3-foot-high brick wall between you and the audience. So they see your upper body, they see your face, they see your arms, and you go, well, there's just this little part I'm leaving out. It's the equivalent of a little mouse. So it's not really a big deal. But the audience will, believe it or not, sense that something is hiding behind that brick wall. There's something there that they can't see, but they know something's there. And for all they know, it could be a monster, it could be a dragon, it could be a lion, it could be a tiger, it could be any number of things. All they know is they're not getting 100% of you. And the 100%, when they know they're getting that, that builds in a layer of trust that supersedes almost all the information you could possibly hope to share. Because if they're getting information from somebody and they feel they can't trust the person for some other reason, then all the information is going to do is get put in a file, and maybe they'll look at it, but chances are they would never work with the person who is presenting it. On the other hand, if they have someone who they know they could trust, and this person is willing to admit some foibles, some problems, then people will be more forgiving. People will say, I'll give that person the benefit of the doubt. At least I know if they say they know this much, I can trust them to know this much. And hopefully when we get to the part where they need to know more, hopefully they'll have gotten there for me. So I want to tell you, because I did say that I would share why this matters to me. And here's where I want to share a bit of my own story and why sharing this with you really makes a difference to me. You see, my background, I was a kid who, for one reason or another, just always stayed on the sideline. I was told, I grew up at a time when children were told, you're supposed to be seen and not heard, don't speak unless you're spoken to, and I was a rule follower, so I listened to that. I also was the younger brother of a child who had some medical problems, so there were some challenges in the house, and my parents were more attentive to his needs, and mine could wait. So I got very used to sitting on the sidelines, and I kept receding into the background. And that's cost me many things over the course of my life. There's a lot of things that, looking back, I would have loved to have tried, but somehow I didn't have that sense of it's my time to step up. But what it really did for me in my formative years was get me very gun-shy about ever speaking up and being heard or seen. And it got worse and worse through the years I was in grammar school. And every time I would have that chance to stand up and be seen, it seems I would shrink from it. But it built toward a moment in the middle years of grade school where there was a spelling bee. And the spelling bee was going into overtime, and it was after lunch, and I hadn't gone to the bathroom after lunch, and so we're sitting there, and the spelling bee just keeps going on and on and on, and looking back, I go, I should have just thrown the spelling bee and left the room to go to the bathroom, but I didn't. So I was there waiting, hoping that the spelling bee would end, and nature kept building the pressure inside, you could imagine, and I was there facing this challenge of, do I interrupt the spelling bee and tell the teacher I have to go to the bathroom? Or do I let nature take its course? And I ended up letting nature take its course. I was more scared to be seen, to be heard, to interrupt, to challenge, than to face something that I knew would be embarrassing. It's not as if I didn't think there would be consequences. It seemed that there were less. And over the course of time, that same struggle to stand out kept me hidden through years of high school, early college, and I even ended up in a government job for many, many years because I didn't take that big step out to be seen, and I sort of went for the civil service test. And it wasn't until many years later, largely through my time in theater, that I found that it was worth getting out there in front of people, that I did have something to share, that it felt good to be seen. And now I make it my mission to help other people who face that challenge of standing out, of getting out there and being seen, of making a difference with what they have to offer instead of letting it sit there untapped. That's what I do. And the reason I'm sharing it on this call is to prove one other thing for anybody who feels that their story is too painful or embarrassing to share. I told that story live from a stage about 4 years ago in front of over 100 people, having never told that story to anybody in my life. My parents didn't know, my siblings didn't know, my wife didn't know. No one knew that story. That first time, as I was about to tell it, it felt like being on that highest of high diving boards. What I can tell you now is that that story has lost its power over me. I spent the better part of 40-some years hiding that story, thinking if anybody knew me, I would go back under a rock and just hide from the rest of the world. And here I am on a webinar with a lot of people that I don't know. I don't know you. I don't know what you might want to do with the information. But once I started sharing it, I realized I'm free of that story. So if you feel that what you have to share is too painful or embarrassing, I want this to be an example that the good news is once you get it out there, the embarrassment stops. The pain stops. So don't ever let your feeling that it's going to hurt too much stop you from sharing something that might save somebody else's life or might change their whole outlook about their own situation. So let's talk about where your compelling story can really make a difference, because I want to get into the value, the bottom line business value of your compelling story. And here are just some places. When you're up and speaking, obviously, when you're speaking, your story has to get into it. The most boring speakers are the ones who feel, I'm just going to give you 5 pieces of information. If you wanted to give me 5 pieces of information, send me an email with 5 pieces of information and let's stay home. If you're speaking in front of me, tell your story. Make me understand why you've gone through something that you're going to understand why, if I'm going through the same thing, you can guide me through it. In addition, once you dig for your compelling story, there's almost always a way you can use it in written form. If you're writing a book, if you want to contribute toward a book, it's a great place to start, because your story, that hunt for your story, is going to take you all sorts of places. You can use it on your website if you're talking about yourself. You don't have to go into every last detail, but you can talk about your story on your website. And at the bottom you see some CDs. The reason is, and we're going to talk about ways that your story can help you create better programs, can help you do more things that reach more people. Your story can actually create more opportunities for you to help people, to create deeper programs, and to make more money. And obviously, there's a part of business that always does come down to making money. I mean, part of business is making a profit. So let's talk about how a compelling story can make you more money. First of all, when you go to a speaking engagement, when you tell your compelling story and connect with people more deeply, they're going to want to come up to you afterwards and connect on a more one-to-one basis. The people that are most moved by your story and will come up to you and start talking about it, they will likely become potential ideal clients. They're self-identifying themselves. They feel something deeper. What you've said has moved them. It has resonated, so on and so forth. So them coming up gives you a chance to feel like you have a pre-qualified lead. Now, whether that person ever becomes your client or not still comes down to follow up and so on and so on. But having those people come up to you after a speech lets you know. And by the way, after that speech I mentioned where I told that particular compelling story in front of over 100 people, 2 women came up to me and specifically said, I thought I was the only one. So there are a lot of people who may come out of the woodwork and say, you've given me an assurance that I can share things with you because you've been willing to share your truth with me. But on top of the people who come up to you after a speech, what also can happen that leads to more money is when people see why you're of particular help to them, you start getting seen as less of a commodity. If you're a practitioner in a certain field and there's a lot of people doing similar work, a lot of times people will think I have to price myself exactly like everybody else does because that's what the market bears and so on and so forth. Because everybody is just looking at it as, let's just pick, I'm just going to say I'm a chiropractor. And every chiropractor in my neighborhood charges the exact same thing because people will go around and they'll price chiropractors and they'll go to the least expensive one. So we all have to be priced about the same area. Well, if you're a chiropractor who, let's say you went through some challenges and in terms of, let's say, your own physical nature, maybe you're a female chiropractor and you had some issues with your own pregnancies. And because of that, you studied a lot more about how chiropractic could help pregnant women. And you start talking about that. Instead of just being a chiropractor who says, and I also help pregnant women, you talk about how much it matters to you to have somebody there who knows what it's like to help a pregnant woman be able to carry her child to term, to have a healthy delivery, an easy delivery, whatever the things are that the chiropractor can do. Once that message gets out, if there's a woman who's looking for a chiropractor, who's got a child, who is really concerned that there's some issues that might get in the way, she's really not going to be looking first at price. Now, that's not to say the chiropractor can charge whatever the chiropractor wants, but the chiropractor could charge a premium above the other chiropractors because of this particular way of presenting how she does her services. So your rates could go up. And it could be that way for many, many types of businesses. You also can make more money by identifying the deeper issues that are really causing people the challenges that they face. And as I go through the 4 ways you can look for your story, I'm going to explain this in particular detail because this is one of the richest things that a compelling story can do. All of a sudden, you will start finding more ways that you can work with people. You're going to be helping them with more things than you originally thought you were bringing to the table. There's going to be new programs. And as as you have new programs, you're going to keep your clients for a longer term. You're going to have more loyal clients. You're going to have people who will refer you for more reasons than they currently do. So those are just a few of the ways that your story can lead to more money. So I just want to share, as I mentioned before, getting people to come up to you after a speech. I mentioned that I had a couple of people come up to me after a speech. I worked with a woman, Terry Nicoletti, who works with women on getting over fear of public speaking and getting out and being seen. And she did some work with me. She thought her compelling story was about helping women have their voice. And I just did some digging with her, and we found out it really went deeper. It went to the point of having talent that gets suppressed and achieving what you can by releasing that talent. And she shared this story at a speech the day after we worked, and she had tremendous response. 15 of the 17 people came up to sign up for her free offer, and 2 immediately said they wanted to work with her. That's how quickly things can happen. And there are people, probably a few people on the call, who work in a corporate environment who may be thinking, well, this is fine for entrepreneurs and coaches, but for the corporate world, everything is all buttoned up and everything is stiff. And now I wouldn't necessarily say you'd want to get up at a corporate boardroom meeting and share every last detail about your work. I'm sorry, about your story. But what ends up happening, if you've been digging for your story, it may uncover some things that can help you have a new perspective, bring things to your business that you never thought was possible. And Pam Norton was a person like that. She really does get involved with selling to corporate America. And she was a little hesitant, but she did find that taking her compelling story did allow a lot of people to resonate with her issue. So it is possible. It isn't simply something just for, let's say, holistic healers, where people are sort of expecting a type of story that goes into feelings and sensations and things like that. So let's start talking. This is the first point. We're going to talk now about 4 keys to start discovering your story. And the first is to refine the issue with which you help clients into a more global issue. Find out what really matters. And this is a key. This relates to the point I was making before about finding more ways that you can be of support to people, finding other issues with which you could be helping them. And I'll give you an example. We talked before about weight loss, so let's stick with that range. And there are any number of people who will help others with challenges they have about losing weight, feeling better, things like that. And very often, when you ask them what they help people with, it's pretty much that surface issue, weight loss. When you start looking for your compelling story, the first step that I take people through, and the first step in the Quick Start Guide that you can get that I mentioned earlier, and I'll give you the link again toward the end of this call, the first step is refine the issue. Because people generally don't lose weight simply for the sake of losing weight. It may sound like they do, but they really don't. People lose weight for some reason, some benefit they want in their life. And it will vary from person to person. It could be that they want to have a better relationship with someone they're together with, and they really want to make sure they look better. It could be that they're at the end of a relationship and they're re-entering the dating field. It could be that they just turned into a grandfather and want to play with grandchildren for the foreseeable future instead of sitting on the couch while the kids are running around outside. It could be that they want to look good so their daughter is proud of them as the father walks the daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. There are lots of reasons people do that. And what you want to do is you want to start refining the issue that you help people with into what's the more global issue. So as an example, are you helping them with issues of self-worth or body image or guilt or shame or relationships, validation? There's all sorts of deeper global issues. And the reason this becomes important is very often the actual challenge people face is simply the latest manifestation of something that's been impacting their lives in many, many ways. So imagine if instead of framing your work as helping people with weight loss, you really start reframing it as helping people have a greater sense of self-worth. And of course, a first step might be to help people feel good about themselves and their bodies. It might still be about the weight loss, but that would just be the opening door. And you'd be able to start taking them deeper and start exploring other issues around self-worth or other issues around guilt or shame. Same thing happens for a lot of people who work with people who have money issues. You know, whether it's getting out of credit card debt or saving for retirement or whatever it is. The issue people have very often is a much deeper one about money. It very often comes from an attitude that was conveyed to them by their parents. So they've had these challenges all their lives and they want to do better. So instead of just worrying about how to save money for retirement or how to get out of debt, you know, part of it is how do you have a healthy attitude about money? How do you have a good relationship with money? And all of a sudden, instead of simply helping people with that one thing, okay, you're out of debt, boom, we're done, next client. Instead, you'd be working on what's the healthy relationship with money. We're not just going to get you out of debt. And we're not simply going to set up a savings account. We're going to create that healthy relationship with money. So where you want to go first is to take that issue and go deeper. Now, the second thing that you're going to want to do is you want to dig back in time to when the global issue first arose for you. It's when your journey started. So what happens here, most of us had our lives pretty much set on a certain course before the age of 8. That's the time when our personalities are formed. It's a time when we're kind of like sponges. We take a lot of things in, and we don't necessarily have the perspective to process it all. So things that our parents may have said to us may have triggered those deeper issues. And here's where it's important to talk about that global issue. Because let's say your issue that you've been helping people with, and I'll just keep using weight loss just for continuity's sake. Let's say that's your issue now, and that's what you help people with. So chances are, now obviously there's some exceptions, but chances are you didn't have a weight problem when you were 3 or 4 or 5. Now you may have. I mean, there's obviously going to be differences from person to person, but a lot of people, weight loss the weight challenge comes later in life. But if you tie in that the weight loss was really an issue about validation or having to be seen, then you think back to what's the first time you felt that it wasn't safe to be seen, or you were told you weren't supposed to be seen. That's where you want to dig back to. You want to dig back to what that first thing was that started you on this course, because that is something that changed your life. And what the value is in this is when you can share that this happened at that point in time, other people will have had something similar. It won't necessarily be around weight. It may have been about a whole different thing. But if you talk, for example, about not being able to be seen, a whole bunch of people are going to resonate with that, saying, when I was a little girl or a little boy, the same thing happened to me. You know, I've worked with a number of people on compelling story issues, and I very often mention some stories that were mine, and very often people say they heard the same thing. I remember coming home from one of the early grades in grammar school, and we'd been told this was going to be a particularly difficult test, and I had shown it to my mother. She was pleased. I had gotten a 96 on the test, and most of the class, and I'm not saying this to brag or anything, it was just the way it was. I knew most of the class had scored in the 70s, a couple of people in the low 80s, so 96 to me was really, really great, and I was very proud. And I showed it when my dad walked through the door. When he came home from work, the first words out of his mouth were, "What happened to the other 4 points?" And that set me on a path about perfectionism. I mean, we don't only have one thing in our lives that's a compelling story. We have lots of things that impact us. And believe me, my perfectionism sometimes went to extremes. When I told that story, a number of people in a program with me said, my dad said the same thing to me. And it doesn't mean that your dad was trying to hurt you when he said it. You don't have to take it as an affront. All it was we as young children didn't have the perspective to process what may have been an offhand remark. It may have been a joke. It may have been a tense day at the office. It could have been anything. But it sets us on a path. Imagine you're a young child, you're 3 or 4 years old, you're in a supermarket with a parent, and you ask for cookies. And the words back are, you don't deserve them. Maybe you had done something the previous day and your parent thought it was a way to give you a little punishment. So all of a sudden you think, I don't even deserve a box of cookies. It's a lifelong struggle with self-worth. Or maybe the parent says, we can't afford it. And all of a sudden you have money issues thinking, oh my goodness, we don't have money. We can't afford cookies. I should stop asking for things. All sorts of things can crop up. This is why you want to dig back to when those issues first arose. You want to start looking at those formative years. That's where the richest discoveries are going to come. Then as you are researching and going back through your history, you want to then say, what else did this issue create in your life? What happened over the years? You know, chances are, if it affected you at that age, it affected you again in other years. So if you had self-worth issues that were triggered in your formative years, chances are when you started dating, you had self-worth issues. When you got married, you may have had self-worth issues. You may have had self-worth issues as a mother or a father. There's all sorts of places. The issue would keep repeating. And then it gets to a certain breaking point. There's that time where it's too painful. You have to make a change, or you realize something. Maybe it's the straw that broke the camel's back. Maybe you finally sat through some seminar or some sermon, and the light finally shined through. What was that breaking point? What was the thing that made it change? Maybe your life in effect hit an iceberg. Maybe it was bankruptcy. It could have been a divorce. It could be a lot of things. What was that final moment where you then say, no more of this problem? I am going to find out how to change my story, how to change my future. And then you want to study how you broke through. So it's about your journey and transformation. That's the third place you want to look. And then the fourth place you want to look, this is the fourth key. And this is important also, and it may not seem like it relates to your particular challenge, your story. But what triggers you when you see other people dealing with that same struggle? When you see other people who are facing a little bit of the same challenge that you did, why does it matter to you? And the reason this is important is people want someone on their team who they feel gets them. They want to have that sense of trust. Now, there's a lot of people, for example, who've dealt with weight loss, who dieted, who got a healthier outlook on their lives, who now are in better shape, who don't go on to help other people who are struggling with weight. It isn't automatic that just because you went through a challenge that you are going to make it your work to help other people with the challenge. So you want to be able to explain why it bothers you when you see other people dealing with that same struggle. When you can do that, people are going to understand. This isn't simply book knowledge. This isn't simply a little bit of experience that now you're going to make money off of. This is important to you to help other people achieve what they want. So those are the 4 keys that you really want to go through to discover your compelling story. And to help you do that, I have created a complimentary quick start guide for you. It's available at bit.ly/startstory. That's bit.ly/startstory. And there's no obligation. You don't have to submit it to me. It's not an online thing. You actually download a PDF. You do it in the privacy of your own home. It takes you through a process. A little of what we talked about today, a few more details. And I really encourage you to go and get your complimentary quick start guide. And if you download it, don't just put it on a shelf and say you'll get around to it. Either do it right away or block out some time in your calendar to do it. The rewards will be great. They really will. I know my compelling story, when I've been able to share it, it's really changed how people respond to me. And I hope you see through what I've shared so far how your compelling story could change things for you. So that is it in a nutshell, or as close to a nutshell as I do. So if you are looking for any more support, I am available at www.speaklouderthanwords.com. And I'm just going to check in with Maria and ask if we have any questions. We have a few minutes.
Hi, John. Actually, yes, we do have a question, and this comes in from Karen, who is from Laguna Beach in California, and she asks, at what point during a public speaking engagement would you recommend sharing your personal story with the audience?
Well, it's a great question, Karen, and what is important to remember is when an audience comes to a speaking engagement, they are there to hear about their issue, their problems. How are you going to solve their issue for them? So you would never want to just launch right into your story at the top. So the first thing you would want to do at a speaking engagement is to talk about the challenge the people in the audience face, whatever that is, and give them a sense of what you're going to share with them. But then before you launch into the points that you're there to share, let's say I was giving these 4 points as a speech. Certainly before I would talk about the ways that your story will make you money, or before I would talk about the 4 keys, I would share what my story is and why it is important for the audience to know. It's really important to put the story into that context, because you're not sharing the story just for the sake of sharing the story. It isn't about your ego. It's so the audience understands why it's important for them to get you. So I hope that helps.
Thank you so much, John. That was a really good response. That's all the questions that we had coming in. I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be sending out a recording to all of the registrants within the next 24 hours of this webinar. And again, if anyone has any questions or needs to get in touch with John, www.speak. Oh, you moved.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it back. I'm sorry.
I thought that was at speaklouderthanwords.com, and go ahead to the next slide for the bit.ly. It's http://bit.ly/start story. And that, again, is a quick start guide for your benefit listeners. Okay, anything else, John?
This has been great, and I really appreciate for everyone who hung out the entire time. I hope you picked up a real clear understanding of a path that you can follow, that this isn't simply, I don't want to make it sound that this is easy work. You know, there are challenges, there are struggles sometimes. There's going to be the type of thing that you may say, oh, I really didn't want to go there, or I don't want to feel like I'm whining or complaining or moaning about my life. This isn't about that. This is about just being able to reach some places where there's a lot of rich material that when you share it with people, they just connect with you in such a different way, and it really makes you stand out from others in the field. So thanks again, Maria.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Take care, everyone.
You're very welcome.
Thanks. Bye-bye now.